It talked about all the progression and change in the last 4 years for the better, to provide full equity, full access.
And Vicki, you feel that this is what?
That there are many reasons a student may feel uncomfortable in the locker room, gender identity being one. But one question that has never been answered is, why is it okay for students to object to sharing locker rooms with those students whose gender identity they don't share? But it's not okay for students to object to sharing locker rooms with those whose anatomy they don't share. All voices matter in this debate.
So in other words, if boys and girls have been separated by those large sort of designators, you don't see why gender identity is a differentiator?
I don't understand why students who object based on anatomy, why their voices are being silenced and shamed and bullied, which has been happening for the last 4 years.
When Superintendent Dan Cates announced this proposed change that the board has yet to ratify, but it's under discussion, there were a lot of people who came to the meetings, correct? Parents whom you represent, what are they saying to the administration?
Well, we had a large group show up last Thursday, and the ones who were able to speak, only 25 were allowed to speak, 16 spoke in opposition. And they said, we care about these students, and we do, deeply. We care about all students. I live by the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. And we just want people to understand that there are many reasons that the girls, we have sex abuse survivors who are a much larger percentage. We need to consider all voices in this debate, and that's just not been happening.
And Tracy, from your side of it, what are the supporters at that meeting that represent your views saying?
In general, separate but equal is not equal, is really the fundamental message. Transgender individuals are not a threat. There's not a safety concern. There's a big difference between the idea of feeling uncomfortable with other human beings who I'm not so familiar with versus there being any kind of safety concern. Transgender people are not a safety concern to anyone, not in the locker room, not on the street, not anywhere else. And I think that as society has grown in the last 4 years and there's been more discussion and more acceptance and more inclusion, I think people have learned that transgender individuals are just like human beings, just like me and you. And so they don't need to be ostracized or for my will to be imposed upon another human. I think that they need to be treated with dignity and respect like the rest of us.
Vicki, do you agree that there isn't a threat to the students who are not trans?
The word threat, I mean, that's a big word. Again, we have sexual abuse survivors, and what I also find appalling is that in this, with regard to the women's rights movement here in the United States and around the world, women have fought for their rights. What no one is talking about is how this affects Title IX. When you put gender identity right next to sex in these types of policies, it erases women and children as a legally protected class. And now we're telling girls in vulnerable spaces that their natural need for boundaries in these private spaces is somehow now wrong.
So help break that down for me a little bit. When you say sexual abuse survivors and concern about boundaries, is there implied in that a threat, or they feel threatened?
We're not saying that the students would do anything, but there's a reason that these facilities have been separated by biology and anatomy for all these years. So there is the concern that if you're a sexual abuse survivor, having a biological male in your private vulnerable space while you're undressing, why are those voices not being considered? They've just been told not to talk about it. They've been told if you don't like it, you can leave. But
Who told them that?
The administrators. But the administrators bend over backwards for the students who want access into the opposite sex locker rooms. But the girls are told to just not talk about it.
And that's said formally by administrators to students?
Yes.
Is that your experience as well?
My experience has not been that at all whatsoever. In my experience, the district is willing to provide accommodations and supportive services to all students, anyone who is uncomfortable or who need any sort of individualized support. I think that the difference is that, aligning the concept of sex abuse survivors being traumatized by the existence of a transgender human being, there is no data to support that notion. I think that it is a very fear-based notion, and I think that the real concern is the safety concerns that transgender individuals experience. That, you know, from a mom's perspective, I want my kids to grow up in a school and a community where they're learning and practicing acceptance and equity and inclusion and respect. They're learning that at my home. You know, as a mom, I'm teaching that. They're learning that in their elementary, their primary school district. My children are 4th and 2nd grade. I want that message to continue as they move forward into high school.
I think we would all agree that locker rooms are uncomfortable, no matter which locker room it is, especially for kids who don't want to undress in front of anybody, right? Is the privacy space that's provided by the district, if you do feel uncomfortable, you can go behind a door and undress or dress, is that sufficient to allay students who have either modesty or privacy or other concerns?
Well, the girls who have used those in the past were mocked and bullied by other students. And then when they asked if they could use the other facilities that had been created special for the first student, they were told those facilities no longer were available. They were made available to the first student, the biological male student, but they weren't made available to the girls. And there's just been significant difference in the treatment of the students, and that's why we're standing up for them.
Has that been raised in board meetings, that assertion?
That assertion has been raised in board meetings, but that has not been the experience of the students who I've spoken to at all whatsoever.
What do they say?
They say that the students are using privacy curtains for lots of reasons, for things like you brought up. People desire modesty, maybe they have a scar on their body, or just being in puberty, there's physiological differences. People don't want to be exposed in general. And the reality is that people are not getting naked in the locker room. You know, the Office of Civil Rights report, the investigation went on for months and months, and that report, along with what students say anecdotally, support that people are not dressing down to full nudity. I think that what the district is doing with regards to allowing and creating privacy accommodations, curtains for all students to use, but based on their own free will, if they feel uncomfortable, is absolutely the right thing to do. Everyone can take care of themselves.
Vicki, there's been legal action before. Do you plan to take newfound legal action on the basis of this proposed change if the board votes in favor of it?
We're definitely continuing to monitor with Alliance Defending Freedom.
So no decision yet, but some possibility.
I mean, they are opening themselves up. Again, when you put gender identity next to sex, it makes sex meaningless. If anyone can claim to be a woman, as District 211 has said, they brought in a consultant to say there are up to 900 gender identities and they can change week to week. If anyone can be a woman, then nobody is a woman. So this goes way beyond locker rooms and bathrooms.
Vicki Wilson, Tracy Salvatore, thank you for joining us on Chicago Tonight. We'll monitor it too and talk about this again. There's more on Chicago Tonight ahead. Please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the City Club of Chicago.
Smart people may disagree about what makes a great city, but part of what makes Chicago great is that we don't have to agree. To run a city like ours, a lot of issues come up. The City Club of Chicago is a place to debate those issues and hear from the men and women who shape the policies, lead the industries, and tell the stories that define our city. For the free and open exchange of ideas, the City Club of Chicago.
Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot has been critical of the vaping industry, and now Illinois lawmakers are considering statewide action. A group of them gathered to debate a proposal that would severely limit the availability of e-cigarette products in Illinois. But dozens of vaping proponents showed up to make their case as well. Paris Schutz has the story. Paris.
Phil, as of today, unofficially there have been 9 deaths and more than 530 cases of a mysterious lung disease related to vaping, one of those deaths in Illinois. And this outbreak has caused some to call for immediate ban, an immediate ban on the sale of all vaping products. But Illinois lawmakers today heard arguments on a separate proposal that would ban flavored e-cigarette products throughout the state. So the thinking is these products are marketed toward children with some catchy names and ad campaigns and slogans. And the vape companies say that their products are a smoking cessation tool, but Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul and other opponents say they are having the opposite effect of hooking more youth on nicotine.
You have youth who have never laid their hands on cigarettes, who begin using e-cigarette devices, and then it's a gateway to using combustible cigarettes that was previously the tradition.
There are chemicals in this supposedly harmless water vapor that are known carcinogens, that are known reproductive toxins. There's a lot we don't know, but from what we do know, these are not good for you.
And the Illinois Respiratory Health Association is calling for an immediate ban on all vaping products in the state until the CDC can get a handle on what exactly is causing this outbreak. Attorney General Raoul says his office is looking into legal action against one of the vaping companies, Juul, for deceptive marketing practices. And he says that the General Assembly should go further than just the flavored vape products.
Paris, do lawmakers or public officials have any more of a handle as to what's causing this problem nationwide?
Well, as you mentioned at the top, there were dozens of vaping proponents at today's hearing. They say that the evidence points to unregulated so-called black market vape products that are selling THC or delivering THC in cannabis, not tobacco. This is what they say. And they also say that a statewide ban on flavored e-cigarettes will push adult users back to real cigarettes, and that legal e-cigarettes sold over the counter have been regulated for years.
Our products, the nicotine-containing vapor products with flavors, have been regulated by the FDA for the past 3 years. Their ingredients have remained unchanged for the past 2 years, and the FDA has a list of all those ingredients. So what's being debated today will not do anything to address that particular problem.
Nothing is safe. They are, at the very least, 95% safer than cigarettes. These are products intended for adult smokers, so you must always frame it like that. Should a non-smoker vape? Probably not. But if you're a smoker and you can reduce your harm by 95%, it seems ridiculous not to.
But these groups today say they are in favor of some kind of marketing restrictions in a law passed by the General Assembly so that they will unmistakably not target youth. They're not for a ban. They say adults should freely be able to choose to use these products, but some marketing restrictions could keep them out of the hands of kids. Now, Illinois' Public Health Director Ngozi Ezeki says the jury is still out on what the common thread might be in all of these illnesses.
We're collecting all that information, getting names of products, and we're seeing so many different kinds of products. We're seeing individuals, a single individual reporting that they've used 10, 8, 10 different products. So there's not an answer yet. We are trying to assimilate and aggregate that data from all across the state. The CDC is leading that national effort.
So no official study linking THC underground vaping to these health illnesses. I mean, the thought is that most of them are linked to this, but as the health director is saying, they are still trying to compile all the evidence, and there are people that use multiple different vape products, so they just can't get a handle on what exactly is causing this. So this step today follows recent legislation in the state to put an extra tax on e-cigarettes to help balance the budget. And a study cited by the National Lung Association shows that a little more than a quarter of high school students are vaping right now.
Paris, thank you. Immigration officials target Chicago, though there is no indication of a massive operation. Amanda Vinicky has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Amanda.
Phil, immigration officials today detained 5 people. That is according to a tweet from Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, whose office confirms the raid at Route 66 Pizza, a low-key Italian restaurant near the Indiana border. We are actively monitoring the situation and engaging with community partners for more information on this incident and to provide assistance to the affected families. The mayor's office went on to say via Twitter, Chicago is and always will be a welcoming city, and we stand firmly with our immigrant residents. A spokesperson for ICE did not immediately return WTTW's request for comment. No other details are known at this time. Illinois' senior U.S. senator says he was unwittingly caught in the middle of the Ukraine drama involving President Trump and Joe Biden. Senator Dick Durbin says he'd been ready to call a measure in committee pushing for the release of military aid for Ukraine when suddenly it happened. Since then, it's come out that President Donald Trump may have pressured the Ukrainian president to investigate Democratic presidential contender Joe Biden.
This is unthinkable, it is unexplainable, and it's unacceptable that a president of the United States would reach out to a foreign power and withhold funds for their security unless they cooperate with him politically. I mean, that is about as low as it gets.
President Trump calls the allegations a witch hunt. Meanwhile, Durbin says he doubts the Senate will act on gun control this year. He is calling for universal background checks and an assault weapons ban. Mount Sinai Hospital's chief of trauma surgery says he sees how much more dangerous and deadly assault-style rifles are compared with handguns.
When we see the injury patterns for the assault rifles, to begin with, you see a small bullet hole, but under the bullet hole there's a huge cavitary lesion where there's just tissue that's completely gone. When they hit bones, instead of just breaking bones, they end up shattering them into so many pieces that it's really difficult to even try to repair it.
For the fourth time in a year, teachers at a Chicago public schools charter school could be going on strike. Teachers there are represented by the Chicago Teachers Union and say they want protection for the school's immigrant and refugee population, as well as higher wages and more teachers to help students learning English as a second language. Meanwhile, teachers from around the city are set to vote later this week to authorize a strike. As for the weather, mostly clear skies tonight with a low around 54. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny with a high near 78. Gorgeous. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Still to come on Chicago tonight, one of the mayor's loudest city council critics speaks out. American librarians push back against attempts to censor library content with their annual Banned Books Week. The Chicago bluesman who makes a living as a bus driver for the CTA. A look at what's causing a massive decrease in North American bird populations. And in tonight's viewer feedback, your thoughts on a proposal to raise the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2021. But first, some of today's top business headlines from Crain's. Here's Ann Dwyer.
Phil, a huge Chicago Transit Authority construction job has just received another $100 million in federal funding. Congressman Mike Quigley today announced the key funding infusion for the CTA's ongoing Red and Purple Line modernization program. The most visible portion of the project, the so-called Belmont Avenue flyover, is scheduled to begin within days. When work is completed by 2024, northbound Brown Line tracks will pass over the Red and Purple Line tracks. Those Brown Line tracks now have to cross the Red and Purple lines at the same grade at the Clark Junction, forcing trains to wait for clearance. The CTA says the flyover will make it possible to add several more trains each way during rush hour. In the meantime, there will inevitably be construction delays, and there has been some criticism in the Lakeview neighborhood of the size and impact of such a large elevated structure. Meanwhile, Rush University Medical Center placed first among 93 comprehensive academic medical centers in a new evaluation of clinical performance, quality, and accountability. Rush was the only Chicago area hospital to be recognized in the latest ranking done by the healthcare consulting firm Vizient. The consultancy looked at quality performance at 349 U.S. hospitals, and this is the 7th consecutive year for Rush to be ranked in the top 5. And finally, former Johnson Publishing CEO Desiree Rogers, who oversaw that company's Fashion Fair makeup line, is back in the beauty business. Rogers, who also was the White House social secretary under former President Barack Obama, has become the CEO of Black Opal Beauty, a 25-year-old company that has set up an office in the Merchandise Mart, according to sources who spoke with Crain's today. Rogers is teaming up with one of her former Fashion Fair execs, Cheryl Mayberry McKissack, to co-own the company. No word yet on where the company will be headquartered. It was founded in Long Island, New York. For Crane Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Ann Dwyer. Back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Ann. During her campaign, Mayor Lightfoot portrayed herself as an anti-corruption crusader committed to shutting down Chicago's political machine. Her first day in office, you may recall, she signed an executive order stripping aldermen of much of their power. Almost 4 months later, she's still pushing that reform agenda. But some aldermen are challenging the mayor, including 20-year veteran Alderman Anthony Beal, who joins us now. Alderman Beal represents the city's far south side. Alderman, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You published an op-ed in the Sun-Times on Friday. I have to say it was the first time I'd seen an aldermanic op-ed in some time. What was the main point of that?
Well, the main point is basically to sound the alarm that the things that are being put in place by this administration are stripping the aldermen of just the basic powers to be able to serve our communities. We are the voice of our community. We are elected by the people in our community to be that voice. And there's just policies that are being put in place to really circumvent the automatic prerogative to be able to control things in our particular ward, to be able to serve things and people in our ward, and those things are being stripped away from us. City services are lacking beyond belief, and now we do not have the ability to make phone calls to commissioners to be able to get city services for our constituents, from streets and sand. Who knows what's going to happen come snow season. And so these things are being stripped from us, but the people have elected us to serve our community. Right now, there's an organization that has been sent by CTA to come into my ward and start planning different things. I think I've done a great job in the last 20 years of bringing jobs and opportunity into my community. I've been able to create over 1,400 jobs, and we have over $435 million of private-public investment in my community. That is a direct reflection as far as dropping crime in my area. We're increasing the education in my community, and so we're working on the housing stock.
So excuse me, just to clarify, you're saying that the kinds of steps that you say you've done on behalf of the 9th Ward would not be possible, are no longer possible given the restraints that you say are imposed?
Absolutely not. And so if there's a business that wants to come into my area, now we sit down with the administration to see if that's a business that we want or don't want. And if we do not have the unilateral ability to say what we want or don't want on behalf of our constituents, then there's really not a use to have an alderman in the city of Chicago.
When was the last time you had a conversation with the mayor?
Well, actually, this morning we had a Black Caucus meeting, and the mayor was there to talk to the Black Caucus.
And did you have a chance to express some of these concerns to her?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what did you say, and how did she respond?
Well, again, I don't want to get into the specifics on what happened at the Black Caucus meeting, but what I can tell you is that I am advocating for all the aldermen in the city of Chicago to have a voice, because right now, if we do not have a voice, there's no need to have aldermen here in the city of Chicago. So I'm fighting for the institution of aldermen to be able to have a voice on behalf of their constituents.
Well, the mayor says she wants to give aldermen a voice, but not veto power. Is that reasonable?
Well, the thing is, if we do not have veto authority, then who does? Is it a commissioner downtown who is not elected by the people? Is it a deputy commissioner downtown that's not elected by the people, who my constituents would never be able to get to because they're hiding behind a desk downtown in City Hall? We are on the front line. We're in the community. We have to live in our wards. We have to have office in our ward. People know how to get to us. So if you do not have that direct contact with your people, then the city services from a day-to-day will be lacking, because people will not be able to get to the so-called people that are making these decisions in City Hall.
And early on, as you know, the mayor issued an executive order significantly scaling back the power that aldermen have over zoning decisions. When a project is big and has an impact beyond a ward, what's wrong with that?
Well, the thing is, we all try to work together. But if an alderman is raising questions about a development in their ward, then we have to listen to that alderman, because they are charged by their constituents to have the voice and the ear of their community. So we listen to that alderman. If they're raising concerns about what type of development that's happening, and if they don't have the ability to advocate for or against their community, then, why are we here?
How many aldermen agree with you that the mayor is undermining their legitimate roles, but are keeping a low profile about it? Right now, there are just a couple, three of you who sort of go on the record in a very public way that you oppose the mayor when she takes steps like these. How many more are there?
Well, I believe that there are a lot more that are really concerned about the direction in which the ship is going. And let me just say, we want to support the mayor. We want the city to succeed. We all want to work together. But at the same time, if you send someone into our community that are non-elected telling my constituents what's good for them, and they look at their alderman and say, Alderman, we need your help, and I tell you, I can't help you because we don't have the authority to help you anymore, then, that's just raising questions. So there are a lot of aldermen that are raising the same concerns that I'm raising, but, some are just not as vocal as others.
And if you had to give me an estimate, what? 5 to 10, 10 to 15?
Well, let me just say there's a substantial amount of aldermen that are dissatisfied with basically not having the amount of prerogative that we should have.
But wasn't she elected with a mandate, and part of that mandate had to do with her statement that she wanted to curb aldermanic abuses?
No, there was never anything on the campaign about aldermanic prerogative. The campaign was that we want to clean up government, we want to clean up corruption. There was nothing in the campaign that says we want to take all the authority away from the alderman. We were elected by the same people that elected her, and so we're going to continue to fight that fight because, I'm fighting for the best interest of my community. And so when you look at the mandate, was it a mandate for change in city government? Was it a change for corruption? Absolutely. But was it a change to say we're going to take the voice away from your alderman? I don't think so.
Well, as I recall, there were statements alluding to the fact that the aldermanic prerogative was the source of a lot of aldermanic abuses, and that was an area of concern. But you see it differently. She has assigned new chairpersons to 11 different city council committees. You lost your leadership of a committee. Your reaction to those changes?
Well, again, we all want to work together. We want to move this city forward. Right now, the aldermen have the right to select the chairman and select the committees, but they saw fit to defer to the mayor to make those decisions. We're the only government probably in the country that allows that to happen. When you look at Congress, they don't allow the president to name their committee chairs. When you look at Springfield, the governor doesn't name their committee chairs, the speaker does. We're the only level of government that really defers to the mayor. And so we have to fight just for the institution. We have to make sure that there's separation of power and there are checks and balances.
One of the mayor's newly approved rules has to do with requiring aldermen with conflicts of interest to recuse themselves from voting. Do you have a problem with that one?
Absolutely not.
You're okay with that?
If there's a conflict of interest, then the aldermen should not be able to advance themselves financially on the backs of the city of Chicago.
How much goodwill or clout, to put it another way, does the mayor have when it comes to filling the $838 million budget hole that has to be filled by the end of the year?
Well, let's just say we're going to work together to try to fill that hole. But I can tell you, in the direction that we're going right now, if you're constantly taking authority away from us to be able to serve our constituents, and that's what it's about, to serve our constituents, to be able to move our communities forward, it's going to be very hard to get 26 votes to vote for an $838 million tax increase.
Do you expect much more? Do you expect increasing tension and conflict between the city council and the mayor?
Well, I hope not. I'm not here to, advocate for a fight. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to work together for the betterment of this great city, but we have to do it in a respectable manner. We have to be respected if we're going to move forward. If we're going to be charged with filling an $838 million hole, how do I look if I can't go and serve my community when my residents come to me and say, Alderman, I need A, B, C, and D, and I tell them I can't do it, you need to go talk to a commissioner downtown, and then they're going to look at me saying, well, Alderman, we elected you. And so there have to be checks and balances, and I'm all in favor for making sure that there's no conflicts. There should be some reform when it comes to permitting and things like that. And I made a recommendation to the administration that if an alderman is holding up a permit or a permit is being denied, flag that to be investigated. Just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Investigate why that permit is being held up.
Alderman Anthony Beal, 9th Ward, thank you so much for being here. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And up next, the fight against censorship, so stay with us.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
This week is Banned Books Week. That's an annual event organized by the Chicago-based American Library Association to highlight the threat of censorship. According to the ALA, more than 480 books were challenged or banned in libraries, schools, and universities across the country in 2018. And while there's little effort to challenge what adults read, attempts to limit what kind of content children and teenagers can read are common. Joining us now to tell us more, Deborah Caldwell-Stone. She's Deputy Director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Welcome to Chicago Tonight. And first, a little bit more about Banned Books Week. Why is it necessary?
Well, we think it's necessary because censorship still occurs in this country, and primarily in our public libraries and our public schools, where young people should have the right to access the reading materials they want and need to see. And really, when there's censorship that occurs in a library, you're really taking away books from the entire community. You're imposing one person's moral viewpoint or religious viewpoint on the entire community, when in fact the library is an institution that should be serving everyone, and even the minority voices, the underrepresented in the community, should be able to find themselves in a library collection.
As you know, social forces ebb and flow. How would you assess the extent to which there is banning of books now as opposed to previous years?
I think that it's a pretty constant. I've been doing this work now for nearly 20 years, and we range really between 350 and 450 reported challenges in our that we see in our office every year. And we do know that that's just a fraction, because there are many forces mitigating against the reporting of censorship. Librarians and teachers fear to lose their jobs. There's not enough local reporting covering local school boards or library board meetings. So we often don't hear about censorship when it occurs in smaller communities across the country.
Your office has compiled a list of 11 books that are the most challenged. We don't have time to go through all of them, but let's go through a few of them just to give us a sense of what's under attack. The book George by Alex Gino. Why is this one being censored, do you think?
And it's a lovely children's novel, and it's being censored primarily because its protagonist is a transgender girl who is struggling with their identity and their events at school. And so we're seeing lots of challenges to that, along with other LGBTQ materials.
A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo by Jill Twiss. This one's gotten a lot of
yeah, certainly. This is the parody picture book put together by Jill Twiss of Last Week Tonight. It's been challenged because of LGBTQ content and because of its political and religious viewpoints.
Captain Underpants. It's a series written and illustrated by Adav Pilkey.
Yes, very popular with young boys of the 7- and 8-year-old type. It's been challenged because it questions authority, and it's seen as encouraging disruptive behavior among young boys. So, and most recently, its latest book featured a same-sex couple. So.
I see. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas.
A really stunningly powerful young adult novel about a young woman's experience after her friend is gunned down by police. It's been challenged by FOP chapters across the country for being anti-cop, along with profanity, sexual situations, and drug use.
And a book called Drama.
Drama is a middle school graphic novel, coming-of-age story, and it's been challenged because, again, it has LGBTQ content in it. It's a theme we're seeing a real effort, it seems, to silence some marginalized and underrepresented voices in this country.
10 years ago, what kinds of challenges were made? For example, this, as you point out, there seems to be a theme that books dealing with LGBTQ issues seem to be targeted right now. What was it like 10 years ago? What were the subjects?
10 years ago, Harry Potter was at the top of our lists for witchcraft, sorcery, and again, teaching kids to question authority. But also there were more common books being challenged for profanity, sex situations, Catcher in the Rye, Huckleberry Finn for racial epithets. And even today, those books still appear on our challenge list. They just don't occur as frequently as they used to.
And when you say banned in, is it primarily in public schools? Is that the consideration? Is that the concern, I mean?
That's the concern, but Book removals also occur in public libraries and even in private schools. Just last week there were headlines about a Catholic school that removed Harry Potter from its library. But when we talk about ban and challenge, what we're really talking about is a request to remove a book from the library because somebody doesn't agree with the content, doesn't approve of the content. And in most instances, the library has a policy that deals with the challenge, allows the person to be heard, and considers whether the book should be in the collection. In most instances, it does belong in the collection and it is retained. But every once in a while, we see situations where a school administrator will act on their own and just they'll get a parent complaint and walk to the library and pull that book off the shelf. And that's when we'll get involved, advocating on behalf of both the book's right to be in the library and the student's right to read it.
How many times is the objector an individual? How many times is it an organization? Who objects, basically?
Primarily parents and library patrons, but we've been seeing a rise in advocacy groups banding together to challenge materials they don't approve of. We actually had a lawsuit brought in the state of Colorado to try to remove materials from schools. Laws proposed in state legislatures that would allow parents to sue a teacher for providing the wrong novel that the parent doesn't approve of to the teacher. So we're seeing an interesting trend in these advocacy groups getting involved with book challenges.
What happens in a classroom, say, if a parent sincerely objects to a book that his or her child is reading? Does a parent have an option in that case to say, you know, I don't care about other parents. They can decide what is okay for their kids, but I don't want my kid reading this book yet.
Absolutely. Almost every school board, every library has an option for parents to choose what their child reads.
To object if an assignment is made.
Yeah, and ask for a substitute assignment. And schools make that accommodation frequently. And so that when there is a question about an individual family's values, the schools are more than willing to support that without disrupting the curriculum or the book choices in the library for other families.
What are the legal principles here? I mean, what's the state of the law in terms of when a school board can say, no, we're going to yank that book?
Well, we can go all the way back to 1982. The Supreme Court decision in Board of Education v. PICO ruled that it would violate students' First Amendment rights if you removed books from a school library because of partisan disapproval or disapproval of the language or ideas expressed in the book. And we've seen other court cases since then affirm that legal principle. And that's what we fight for, is a student's First Amendment right. It's the core of our democracy, free speech, free expression, and you can't chip away at it. It's not an abstract idea. You have to protect civil liberties in order to keep them.
Deborah Caldwell, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
He is just your typical CTA bus driver who happens to moonlight as a sought-after Chicago blues musician. As a guitarist, singer, and songwriter, Toronzo Cannon drives the sound of Chicago blues from the city to blues clubs and festivals around the world. Toronzo Cannon just released his second recording. We were there when he prepared his first release on Alligator Records back in 2016, and here is another look.
You know I love them and I leave them. I give them something they never had. That's ever happened to y'all?
Toronzo Cannon has risen steadily to the upper ranks of local blues artists. He carries pride in his Chicago upbringing.
Oh yeah, South Side, 4858 South Michigan, down in the basement.
An early fan of reggae, the 48-year-old recalls hearing the blues while growing up.
My grandparents raised me, so it was always in the house, but I really didn't embrace it, I guess, until I would go out to jams, and they didn't have reggae jams. All they had was blues jams. And I was like, oh, I remember them songs, and from my grandmother's house, and you hear Little Walter and people singing My Baby, Muddy Waters and all that, and it's everywhere, And I live by Teresa's, which is like a famous blues lounge. Buddy and Muddy and all those cats used to go to. Everybody all right this morning?
Before sunup on a February morning, we met Toronzo Cannon at his day job.
Channel 11 in the house. Don't work till. All right, I'll see y'all later. That man right there owe me money right there. I've been driving a CTA bus for 22 and a half years now. Armitage, number 73, and the number 20, Madison. Oh, this is my world for the next 10 hours. the stuff that I see around me sometimes, influence songwriting. Things I've heard, I might overhear something on the bus, or some cat might say something. I heard a lady one time, I need a boyfriend, it's Christmas time coming,
Cannon uses the vacation time he earns at the CTA to travel to gigs overseas.
And I go to Lucerne, so I went to Switzerland, Armenia. I can take one day off. I went to Amsterdam the first time. I took off Thursday, and I came back Sunday, and I was on the bus Monday, I got to work on time, you know what I mean? So, that's my only thing. I go to work on time, I want to get off on time.
When I look for artists to sign for Alligator, one of the key things I do is go to see their live performance. Toronzo is so engaging live. He has so much fun performing music, and he's constantly bantering with the audience.
One thing he does not do is embody certain cliches of the blues genre.
I have a couple of artists who have had some drug or alcohol history. He's not one of them. He actually had his first drink I think he was over 40 when he first had a drink.
I tried some kind of drink that had some schnapps or something in it, and I didn't like it. You know what I mean? It's like, I could feel my eyeballs because I took a big sip of it, and I put it on the amp for the rest of the night, and that was it. I guess I'm the 21st century blues man. I really don't need that. You know what I mean? It's just living life, and sweets is my thing. I like cake. Feeling so strong, might do something wrong, so I'ma just walk it off.
His latest recording, The Chicago Way, is his first for Alligator Records, home to many of the artists he's admired over the years.
It's kind of cool to be on the same record label and be like part of that family now, where it's like, wow, I was practicing doing some Albert Collin licks that, that I couldn't quite achieve, but I was listening to them. And looking for video and things like that, Again, Hound Dog Taylor and stuff like that, cats that in my musical growing up that I, really admired and tried to practice and see what, where their hands were on the strings, So I'm ready to take on the challenge of what Alligator's got to offer and what I got to give, Give them something they never had.
Toronzo Cannon plays record release shows at City Winery in Chicago on September 30th and at Fitzgerald's in Berwyn on October 1st. You can also find him driving the number 157 bus in Streeterville. His new album is called The Preacher, The Politician, or The Pimp. You can see more of Toronzo Cannon on our website. A new study out of Cornell University recently found that there are nearly 3 billion fewer birds in North America than there were in 1970. That's billion with a B. And it's a trend that includes all kinds of birds, not just endangered species. So what's behind this dramatic drop in bird populations and what can be done to reverse it? Joining us now to talk more about the study's findings and local conservation efforts is Carl Giametti. He's president of the Chicago Ornithological Society. And welcome back to Chicago Tonight. First of all, what does the study point to as the main cause behind this population drop?
Well, the study really aggregates a number of different factors that we've known about for some time, but it really starts to quantify it in terms of our overall bird population. So, the main factors are, again, no surprise to bird conservationists. We're looking at feral cats, window collisions with buildings. We're looking at neonic pesticides in grasslands. And really the overarching habitat loss. Their breeding areas, their migratory stopover areas are disappearing.
Some bird groups are being hit harder than others, or is it across the board?
It's across the board, but there are definitely some big areas of concern. Grassland birds have suffered a loss of almost, I think, 52%. They get hit by a number of different factors. Again, habitat loss and neonic pesticides are the two main contributors to grassland bird population declines.
Give me an example of a grassland bird.
So like an eastern meadowlark. It's a bird that has a great reedy trill. If you go to Midway Tallgrass Prairie here in the Chicago area during the right time, the song will just be surrounding you when you're walking through there. And that's a bird that's seen just, I believe, 80% population decline in the past 48 years.
And you referred to neonic pesticides. What are those?
So they're a particular pesticide that's really just been used throughout the United States, and it's incredibly toxic to birds. It'll cause birds to become emaciated and often is fatal. Even the amount spread on one seed can kill a bird. The European Union has actually taken the steps to eliminate a few types of neonic pesticides to protect their pollinators, not just birds, but also all the pollinators, butterflies and insects are really suffering at the hands of neonic pesticides.
Who uses those pesticides? Homeowners, farmers?
It's used by a full spectrum. It's used in agriculture. It enters our waterways that way. It's a little bit more regulated on the commercial agriculture side. For the home side, it's actually, you're allowed to have a higher concentration of neonic pesticides. So pesticides like feed and grow or weed and grow and things like that, you'll often see up to 30 times higher than what's used in the commercial agricultural industry.
Speaking of the industrialized agriculture industry, a little bit more on that on how that impacts birds.
So, it's kind of strange, but the highest quality nature areas actually exist in northeastern Illinois, where there's the most development. And if you contrast that with what happens in agricultural areas, where you have these large grids where habitat is incredibly fragmented because they will just plow over it and then plant monoculture crops like just corn and beans. So there's a lot of habitat fragmentation in agricultural areas that just allows grassland birds' habitat to be wiped out.
Thinking big picture, what can be done to reverse this trend?
Well, habitat preservation. So whether it's our national park system or state park system, local forest preserves, acquiring more land and increasing the quality of that land is the #1 thing that can happen. We can start managing our feral cat population. We can pass bird-friendly building ordinances like the one that's currently before City Council right now. Congressman Quigley is actually trying to pass a bird-friendly building law at the federal level to apply to all federal buildings as well, and those are great starts.
You mentioned feral cats, but what can the average person do to keep more birds alive? For example, bird feeder is a good idea, yes or no?
Bird feeders are great. Planting native plants in your yard. The American grass lawn is unfortunately a barren environment for providing nesting habitat as well as feeding birds on their migratory route. So planting native plants, keeping your cat indoors, and during spring and fall migration when there are a lot of birds going through here, looking at your windows and considering low-cost solutions like applying bird tape to your windows so that way the glass becomes visible to migrating birds.
Some birds like bluebirds have actually increased their numbers. Why is that?
So there's actually been some successes, and the paper is very careful to point that out. Birds like waterfowl, you mentioned eastern bluebirds, a lot of birds that are common feeder birds have done okay. Waterfowl has been benefited greatly from conservation efforts by hunters who purchase land so that way they can provide nesting habitat for waterfowl. So there are some successes. It really proves that we can be successful if we commit to bird conservation.
Are there any steps being taken by the current administration that is making things more difficult for bird populations, or are they left, has the administration left that pretty much alone?
No, unfortunately, the current presidential administration is hitting it from a lot of different angles. Most recently in the news was the opening of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to some more oil exploration. That is a prime nesting area for shorebirds, which are long-distance migrants that winter in the southern reaches of South America and do their breeding in the above the Arctic Circle. And those birds have seen declines of over 34% in the past 40 years, so that's going to hit them hard.
So how does this drop in bird population fit into a larger conversation about global warming?
Well, so there are still some areas of bird population drop that are trying to discern what the impact of global warming is going to be. Most noticeably is actually in Hawaii, which is unfortunately known as the bird extinction capital of the world, where there's an invasive mosquito that can only exist at lower populations where the temperature is warmer. As global warming continues to heat heat the climate, those mosquitoes will travel higher and higher and threaten the native population of birds there.
Carl Giametti, thank you for stopping by and giving us this update. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Before we go, some viewer feedback. A new city council proposal would raise Chicago's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2021. The state is already on track to reach that rate by 2025, but labor unions say that's not soon enough, and some of you weighed in. If the minimum wage goes up to $15 per hour, I'm sure the prices in restaurants will rise. I will also have to rethink my current tipping practices of at least 20%. I mean, if the employees are assured of a living wage, why should I be worried about them not making enough? It is getting more and more expensive to live in the city. So what? Your restaurant meal goes up? The critics have no problem having the government give huge tax breaks to wealthy individuals and corporations. Besides, increased wages means less reliance on food stamps and housing assistance. As always, we appreciate hearing from you. You can join the discussion on Facebook and Twitter or post your comments on our website. And that's our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices. Robert Clifford is the honoree of this year's Illinois Bar Foundation's annual fundraising event that raises money to enhance the availability of justice for those without attorneys throughout the state.